In 1808, Napoleon Bonaparte believed he was unstoppable. He had defeated Austria and Prussia, made peace with Russia, and established the continental system to strangle Britain economically. 6 years later, his empire lay in ruins. The road between those two moments began in Spain. By 1814, this conflict had consumed 600,000 French troops, cost hundreds of millions of francs, and tied down 200,000 to 300,000 soldiers at any given time who desperately needed elsewhere. Napoleon himself called it the Spanish ulcer, a wound that wouldn't heal, slowly bleeding his empire to death. Today, we're examining why the Peninsular War was impossible for France to win from the very beginning. Not because of any single battle, but because Napoleon's entire strategy was fundamentally incompatible with the reality of Spain and Portugal. Let's start with Napoleon's original goal. In 1807, Portugal refused to join Napoleon's continental system, his economic blockade against Britain. According to the Treaty of Fontainebleau signed in October 1807, France and Spain agreed to invade Portugal and divide it between them. On November 30th, 1807, 25,000 French troops under General Junot occupied Lisbon. The Portuguese royal family fled to Brazil. This should have been simple, but Napoleon overplayed his hand. In March 1808, Marshal Murat entered Spain with a large French army. Napoleon then forced both King Charles IV and his son Ferdinand VII to abdicate. On May 5, 1808, Napoleon installed his brother Joseph Bonaparte as King of Spain. This was the fatal miscalculation. Napoleon expected the Spanish people to welcome him as a liberator from their corrupt monarchy. Instead, they rose in rebellion. On May 2, 1808, the people of Madrid revolted. The French crushed the uprising brutally, but those deaths became martyrs for the Spanish cause. The rebellion spread like wildfire across Spain. Then came the first shock. On July 19, 1808, at the Battle of Belen, a Spanish army defeated French forces and captured 19,000 French soldiers. This was the first major French defeat on a European battlefield since 1801. All of Europe realized Napoleon's armies were not invincible. Here's why this war was unwinnable from the start. Napoleon's military system was designed for quick, decisive campaigns in Central Europe, 90 days maximum. Force the enemy into a major battle, dictate peace terms. But Spain was completely different. First, the logistics were impossible. According to research from NATO's Joint Analysis and Lessons Learned Center, between 1808 and 1813, French forces in Spain required massive supply chains to sustain 200,000 to 300,000 troops at any time. The cost was staggering, 800 million francs in the first year alone, and increasing every year after. But here's the critical problem. Spain and Portugal developed a new form of warfare that Napoleon couldn't defeat: guerrilla warfare. The Spanish term guerrilla, meaning little war, actually originated from this conflict. These weren't organized armies fighting pitched battles. These were civilians, farmers, villagers, armed with whatever weapons they could find, conducting ambushes, raids, and sabotage. According to French military records and contemporary accounts, guerrilla actions alone killed or captured an estimated 180,000 to 200,000 French soldiers throughout the war. Let me give you the numbers that show why this was mathematically impossible for France. The French had over 350,000 soldiers in Spain at the peak, but over 200,000 were deployed just to protect supply lines and garrisons, not as fighting units. They couldn't concentrate their forces for decisive battles because guerrillas were everywhere. A Prussian officer fighting for the French described it perfectly. Wherever we arrived, they disappeared. Whenever we left, they arrived. They were everywhere and nowhere. Karl von Clausewitz, the famous military theorist who observed this conflict, devoted an entire chapter of his treatise on war to the Spanish guerrilla warfare. He described it as a strategy where irregular forces conduct dispersed operations to deny the enemy secure lines of communication and supply. Now, let's talk about the British intervention. In August 1808, 14,000 British troops under Lieutenant General Sir Arthur Wellesley, later the Duke of Wellington, landed in Portugal. Wellington would prove to be Napoleon's nemesis in the peninsula. Wellington understood something crucial. He couldn't defeat the French in open battle with the forces he had. So he developed a defensive strategy based on a secret weapon, the lines of Torres Vedras. Between November 1809 and September 1810, Wellington ordered the construction of a massive defensive system north of Lisbon. According to Portuguese government records, this system consisted of 152 forts and redoubts armed with 600 to 648 artillery pieces, defended by 140,000 men total. The remarkable thing, this entire defensive system, which would prove to be the most cost-effective in military history, was built in just 10 months and cost only £100,000. For comparison, that's equivalent to paying 5,500 infantrymen for 1 year, less than one full division. And the French didn't know about it. Wellington kept it completely secret. In October 1810, Marshal Massena invaded Portugal with 65,000 troops. After losing 4,500 men at the Battle of Busaco on September 27th, he continued advancing toward Lisbon. Then, on October 11th, 1810, Massena's troops discovered the lines. According to Colonel Jean-Jacques Pellet, Massena's aide-de-camp, when they saw the defenses, they realized immediately, we could not attack the lines with the 36,000 men that still remained of the army. Even if we had forced some point, we should not have had enough men left to seize and occupy Lisbon. Wellington combined the lines with a scorched earth policy. As his forces retreated behind the defenses, they evacuated 100,000 to 150,000 Portuguese civilians and destroyed everything useful: crops, mills, livestock. Massena's army was left starving outside impregnable fortifications. Massena held position at Santarém for 6 months, but by March 1811, he had lost 25,000 men, mostly from starvation and disease, not combat. He was forced to retreat back into Spain. The French never again came close to capturing Lisbon. Here's what made this war truly impossible to win: the combination of 3 factors working together. Factor 1. Guerrilla warfare forced the French to spread their forces thin. They needed 200,000 troops just to guard supply lines and garrison towns, leaving insufficient forces for offensive operations. Factor 2. British forces under Wellington provided a professional army that could defeat French marshals in conventional battles: Talavera, Salamanca, Vitoria. Wellington's Anglo-Portuguese army became what he called the most complete machine for its numbers now existing in Europe. Factor 3. The Spanish regular armies. Although they lost most major battles, they kept reforming and fighting. Combined with guerrilla actions, they made it impossible for the French to achieve a decisive victory. The mathematics were simple and brutal. According to research published in scholarly military journals, some 250,000 French troops perished in the peninsula out of 600,000 total engaged throughout the campaign. That's a 41% casualty rate over 6 years. These were not troops dying in one catastrophic battle. They were dying in ones, twos, dozens, in endless small actions, ambushes, sieges, diseases. A slow bleeding that never stopped. Napoleon recognized this. From his exile on St. Helena, he wrote in his memoirs, "That unfortunate war destroyed me. It divided my forces, multiplied my obligations, undermined my morale. All the circumstances of my disasters are bound up in that fatal knot." Think about the strategic impact. In 1812, when Napoleon invaded Russia with his Grand Armée, he desperately needed those 300,000 troops tied down in Spain. If even half of those veteran soldiers had been available for the Russian campaign, history might have been different. But they weren't available. They were in Spain fighting an unwinnable war. By 1813, Napoleon faced the War of the Sixth Coalition. Multiple European powers were converging on France. Wellington's army had crossed the Pyrenees and was fighting in southern France itself. On June 21, 1813, Wellington crushed the French at the Battle of Vitoria, effectively ending French control of Spain. The Peninsular War proved something revolutionary, that a great power could be defeated not through decisive battles, but through sustained resistance, guerrilla warfare, and strategic exhaustion. Friends, this war was unwinnable from the moment Napoleon decided to occupy Spain. He assumed the Spanish people would accept French rule or that he could crush resistance quickly. Both assumptions were catastrophically wrong. The war required everything to go right. Quick pacification, Spanish acceptance of Joseph Bonaparte, suppression of guerrillas, defeat of British forces, and successful occupation, all within a short time frame. Instead, everything went wrong. The Spanish never accepted French rule. Guerrillas multiplied. British forces couldn't be defeated or dislodged, and the war dragged on for 6 years. The lesson here isn't about tactics or battles. It's about understanding that wars are systems. When you occupy a hostile population, fight a guerrilla insurgency, face a professional enemy army, and try to sustain hundreds of thousands of troops thousands of kilometers from home, the mathematics of that system make victory impossible, regardless of how brilliant your generals are. Napoleon called it the Spanish ulcer, an ulcer that wouldn't heal, a wound that kept bleeding until it helped bring down his entire empire. If you value serious, evidence-based history, not myths, not shortcuts, subscribe to the channel. This is where we break wars down as systems, not legends. More deep analysis is coming.